everyone, this is Brian from Motive Training, and today we're going to do hip extension PAILs rails. So we have RJ in half kneeling position here, and the goal is we're going to try and stretch out the hip flexors on the front side of that hip. So the first thing we're going to have RJ do is make sure that his hips are stacked, which they are. So sometimes your hips might be turned, so it's important to make sure they're facing forward when you do this exercise. The next thing we want him to do is actually get the front side of his hip to go on stretch. So how we do that is we do a posterior pelvic tilt. So we try to round out the pelvis so that the front side of that hip starts to open up. So he's going to tuck his tailbone and he's just going to hold that for now. If you're more advanced, you can simply maintain a slight tucking of the tailbone and shift some of that tension forward. So RJ could intensify this stretch by rocking his hip forward. Might not need to though. The better you are at creating tension, the less you'll need to go forward because you just know how to put yourself in the right spots. Okay? So RJ is going to radiate a little bit. He's going to create some body tension. He's going to maintain that pelvic tilt, and he's going to drive those poles in the ground, and we're going to make sure he's taking shallow breaths. We don't want big, deep breaths. We want to make sure the focus stays on that front hip. Essentially, we would try to get him to stay here for around 2 minutes and hold that stretch. So that would be anywhere from 2 minutes plus, depending on your tolerance. You could even do less. So the PAILs rails component is, now we're going to engage the hip flexor, so that would be the PAILs. So this is like a dial that we turn from 0 to 100. 100 would be maximum voluntary contraction, where you're trying to go as hard as you can. 0 would be like he's just tucking his tailbone a little bit and he feels a little bit of a stretch. Okay, so PAILs is going to be that we engage the hip flexor. So how we do that is we try to slide the knee forward, because that is how you engage hip flexion. You try to bring your knee up, and that is what RJ would do now. We're going to skip this part and not have him hold this so you can relax. But essentially what you would do is you would slowly turn this up like a dial from 0 to 100%, try to get that tension building in the hip, because we want to safely do it. We don't want to just go in max contraction right away. We want to make sure we keep the tension in the right spots. So as you turn that dial up, make sure you're feeling that hip flexor. Rails. Rails is going to be when you engage your hip extensor. So that would be trying to pull the leg further behind you. So as RJ were to switch to a rails contraction, which we hold for 15 seconds, he would keep that pelvis tucked underneath, and then he would try to bring his leg behind his body. And this isn't isometric, so his body might shift forward a little bit, but realistically, he's simply trying to drag his knee backward. So that is what a PAILs rails would be for hip extension, and the goal is we're simply trying to get hip flexor extensibility better. If we can get the hip flexors to lengthen better, then we can get better extension out of the hip, and that's exactly why we do PAILs and rails in this position.